everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to our live stream. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to get into content and share what we've been working on. So yeah, welcome.
Welcome. Climate reporting. Yay.
Cool.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about climate reporting, which is a pretty popular topic that we talk about with folks.
Yeah, so I do want to pose the question to our audience today, which is, where would you start if you had to publish a climate report by the end of this month? So just take a few seconds, just take a few moments just to think about this. Would you find this request to be one that's daunting? Would you be frazzled by it? Or would you know exactly where to start and how quickly you can produce it?
Yeah. And so when people are typically getting these requests, they do tend to be kind of last minute. And so where people usually start, if you have something that new, is looking at competitors, right? What are other people doing in the space to inform your next steps? And if you were presented with, 3 companies that put out really flashy climate reports, how do you know which one is a credible climate report? Which one should you trust? And so we're going to go over that today.
Sweet. So you may have seen a few of us before if you've been on our previous live streams, but just want to introduce ourselves and explain what we do here at Carbonhound and why we're excited to chat with you.
Yeah. So my name is Erin Andrews. I'm the climate lead here at Carbonhound. If we might have had calls already, but basically my whole goal is to get people understanding their carbon footprint, understanding the quality of their data, so we can get them reporting on their climate as fast as possible.
And I'm Vanessa. This is my first live stream with Carbonhound. So I am the climate action specialist here. So I get to work with the various customers from various industries and really support them in calculating their carbon footprint and also just building climate literacy over time and kind of supporting them through their climate journey.
Sweet. My name is Lauren. I am on the growth side of things at Carbonhound and get to be sort of at the front of understanding what drives people to generate climate reports, where they're feeling pressure, who they turn to for solutions, and what kind of solutions there are out there to help people create climate reports for whoever it is. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's fun to chat with the experts, and we're going to try to take this topic that can be quite technical and very complicated and turn it into something actionable and practical for you to do with your own companies.
Yeah. So between the 3 of us, we talk to every single one of the Carbonhound customers, right? So if you've already worked with us, you would have already spoken to each of us. If you're new, maybe you would have spoken to just a few of us. But really, the things that we're going to be talking about today are covering the most common questions that we get about climate reporting. So the topics that we're going to include is basically starting from ground zero, right? If you want to put a report out there, how do you start? What are the standards you need to meet? How do you get verified, or how do you have certain levels of assurance before it goes out publicly? And then maybe even more importantly is how do you get business value out of the reporting that you're putting out there? So we're going to go through a couple examples today of different types of climate reports that you might see in your research. And then we're going to end it with Vanessa going through how she basically put together Carbonhound's report in collaboration with Lauren and the rest of the team too. So we have a lot to cover today. If you have questions, throw them in the chat. We'll get to them as they come in. But we're gonna go over some cool stuff. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so we really want to start with the why and really the motivations around these type of different climate report requests. So the first one being regulation. So this is for those organizations that are mandated to submit to climate disclosure requirements, usually that have been implemented by governing bodies. Next, we have customer pressure, and we want to view this through a supply chain lens as well. So those large customers who are looking to make their supply chain greener or to improve their environmental performance are getting these type of requests, and how to kind of submit to this this type of request as well. So this can be both mandated or voluntary. And the third one is values. So this will be organizations that are doing this voluntarily, and they also have a part of their mission as something to kind of align with other sustainably oriented individuals or consumers, and that kind of adds value to their brand. So we've come across conversations day to day with organizations who fall under all of these three different pillars, and we'll dive in a bit deeper into all of them.
Yeah, I mean, it might even be interesting because we do talk to all these folks. What are you guys seeing in even our own customer base? Like, what's the biggest motivator across these three?
Yeah, I think it definitely comes down to regulation and a bit of customer pressure as well. But we do see a few of those values aligned organizations who really want to take the first step and kind of differentiate themselves from other organizations too. So it's really refreshing to be able to see that type of work being done because they really want to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really true. And people start, regardless of whether it's regulatory motivations or customer motivations, what's really important to think about is that a sustainability report, if you're just talking about the broad concept of sustainability, you can really cover a bunch of different topics, right? If you have more of a social lens, and you might want to think about community impacts of your operations. As well, when it comes to environment, even, you can break that down into a bunch of different areas, right? There's carbon emissions, there's biodiversity, there's water efficiency. And so when you're thinking and when you're getting started as a company, you might understand your motivation, but the next step is to figure out what are the topics that are most important to your business. And so there are a couple of different reporting frameworks that you can take inspiration from to essentially put together a list of all of the possible options of things you can focus on as an organization for your reporting. So the first one we want to highlight is what's called GRI. So this is the Global Reporting Initiative, and they have a number of different categories of topics. You can see here on the left-hand side that we've blown up the environmental section, so you can see the subtopics within it. But really, they have a pretty, if you're thinking of like ESG or just broader sustainability, GRI is a good framework to start with to think about what those material topics might be for your business. And so when we're talking about climate reporting specifically, you just want to make the clear differentiation that climate reporting is ultimately your greenhouse gas emissions. So we're going to be focusing a lot of our conversation today on the greenhouse gas emissions of climate reporting, which is a subset of broader sustainability reporting that can include a lot of different topics. So GRI is a really important and really common framework to take inspiration from, and even align to entirely if that's your goal. But there's also the UN SDGs, which are quite common.
Yeah, so the UN SDGs, otherwise known as the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, is a combination of 17 global goals, all working towards peace and prosperity for people, planet by 2030. And so we see a lot of this framework being used in a lot of ESG reports. So organizations will, again, take inspiration from these different goals and align it with the initiatives that they're taking on to kind of show that they're working towards creating a social impact of some sort, and also a positive environmental impact as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and these are just a couple examples to start with. Yeah. People can mix these topics if they want to do both GRI and UN SDGs, they can. It's really up to you, but these are some good starting points when you're beginning to think about it.
So just curious obviously these are both, frameworks that are reputable and internationally kind of respected. If you were just starting as a business, would you say that you should rely on one over the other, or does it depend what type of business you are? I guess what would put you in one direction or the other if you're trying to report against these frameworks?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the motivation, which we'll go through a couple examples in a second to crystallize this. But if you are just getting started, it probably makes sense if you don't already have, clear things that your company has said that you care about. Sometimes it just comes from the board and it's like, okay, let's report against the board priorities, right? But if you're starting from scratch and you're guiding your leadership team through all of this, it usually helps to start with something like GRI and just take one that's broad enough and then have them tell you what they want their priorities to be and help guide those decisions through stakeholder surveys, evaluating the impact of each of these topics on your business, right? Are you impacted by biodiversity, or do you impact biodiversity? Both directions of both how you impact and how they impact you. So starting with one as the list, prioritize it, and then go from there is usually what happens.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so when you decide the framework and the different topics that we're going to talk about in the report, likely climate will be one of the material topics just because of how intersectional the impacts of climate change are. And so when we talk about climate change, this means that you need to report on your greenhouse gas emissions, right? Climate change is a result of having too many carbon emissions in the atmosphere. So this is the measurement and the numbers that can back up all of your climate claims. So what makes your climate reporting credible and the numbers that you put in your report credible are actually some standards, which are different than frameworks, but there are standards which tell you how to calculate your greenhouse gas emissions. And the two main standards that we're talking about are ISO 14064 and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And so essentially, when you're looking at whether or not a report is credible, these are the first two things that we look for, is have they calculated their emissions in alignment with these calculation methodologies that are outlined in the standards, because then you know that they've done it in a way that you can compare to other people. That's why we standardize these calculations. So these are the main two. If you're going to remember anything from today and you want to figure out your climate reporting yourself, remember ISO 14064 and Greenhouse Gas Protocol. It's basically instructions on how to do the math. And then when it comes to having someone double check your math, because maybe you've done it, but there might be mistakes, you can get your data verified by an independent third party. And so what that means is similar to how you get your financial statements audited on an annual basis, you can get your greenhouse gas emissions audited as well. And so you don't have to become verified, right? You don't need to verify your math if you don't want to, as long as you disclose that on your report, say that we've done this in alignment with ISO and GHG protocol, but we maybe haven't had someone look at it. You're able to put it out there with that caveat. But typically, when you want to make sure that you're credibly putting data out into the world, you have some level of verification done on that. So the two main options for verification are limited assurance and reasonable assurance. The difference between these two basically means that limited assurance is when a third party will go and look at all your math and they'll check your methodology and they'll spot check a couple of the primary data sources. So say you have your utilities in your inventory and you said that in 1 month you've used 100 kilowatt hours of energy. They're going to want to spot check a couple of those invoices from your utility account to double check that that's correct and you've reflected that accurately in your math. And so limited, they only do that on a few data points. For reasonable assurance, that's when they do everything. So they'll check every piece of data from all of the different calculations to make sure that they can 100% stand behind your math. And so when you're thinking of the pricing of both of these, obviously limited is less expensive than reasonable assurance. And what would motivate one company to go limited or go reasonable just depends on who's asking again, right? If you're regulated, perhaps you want to go full into the reasonable assurance. If it's just for a fun marketing report, none or limited is probably fine. But of course, it's always best to have someone look at it if we're talking credibility.
Yeah, and we'll get into this when we go through some examples, but I think something that I found really interesting is the number of reports out there that don't have any level of assurance, even though they're public documents that a company is putting together for whoever it is. And so, just there's a huge education gap to even develop a report, let alone have the right methodology, and then, people are dreaming about assurance. And Vanessa can probably speak to this as well, but would love just to chat about what, really briefly, Carbonhound can do in that verification process as well.
Yeah, so at Carbonhound, once we gather all the information for your GHG inventory, we can actually go through the process of working with a third-party verifier. And so they'll go through the entire process just to verify all the data that we collect via the platform. And there's different tiers and different levels as well. Like we see here, we have limited and reasonable assurance. And again, it's going to depend on what we're working towards or what the organization's goals are.
Yeah. And what's really cool about our own platform is that we have our calculation methodology verified by a third party, at least annually, if not more. And so what's really interesting is that when people go to get verified using a software that has been verified already, then all the verifiers need to do is double check the data going into the platform. They don't need to do the whole, double check of your math as well, because we've already essentially paid for that. So it becomes a lot faster and cheaper because the software organizes your math perhaps better than someone might have if they did it manually.
Right. So depending on how you get to that data, they may or may not help you get to these levels of verification as well, or facilitate that process.
Yeah.
Cool.
Exactly. Okay.
Okay, and so I guess the general theme, as we've been talking about this topic, is what you include in a climate report really depends on your goals, the type of business you are, what industry you're in, and so much more.
So much more. Yeah, and so I think the examples we're going to go through today will be quite interesting. So the three that we've chosen here are obviously Suncor, Cargill, and Allbirds. I'm going to speak to the regulatory compliance one of these. So Suncor is an oil and gas company regulated from a bunch of different directions for obvious reasons. And so what we're going to see with Suncor's report when we go through it is how detailed they are with their data and really how credible it is in the sense of, doing the math properly and making sure that it's verified to the highest degree, because they have so many eyes on their climate reporting. Obviously, being an oil and gas company, that doesn't mean that they're sustainable, but it does mean that the data that they have is credible because they have regulatory pressure to make it as close to perfect as possible.
Yeah, and then we're going to look at customers or organizations who are receiving customer requests. So Cargill is the example we'll go through. They are, if not the largest, privately held company in the US. And so they make a part of a lot of organizations' supply chain. And so usually they'll come across mandated or encouraged. They'll either be mandated or encouraged to prepare climate reports. So they are getting ahead of that.
Yeah, and then the last one is a values alignment motivation. And so this is, again, just a company who cares deeply about sustainability or is trying to align themselves with a target market or customers who care a lot about sustainability. And yeah, it's again, not voluntary in theory category, but it's a way to solidify their own values and capture that sustainability market.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's jump into some examples. This is going to be fun for us.
It is.
So we'll start with Suncor. And before we jump into this report, you'll see that this is called their climate report of 2022. I do want to mention that Suncor does have a broader ESG report that is more intersectional, if you want to call it that, but it covers some social and some governance elements of their broader sustainability initiatives. But since we're talking about climate reporting, I wanted to pull up a couple pages of this report just to show you how granular their data is. And we can point out some clues of how you could see, or when you're looking at a report, how you can determine how credible it is, right? Because there's lots of graphs sometimes that don't really mean too much, and the other way around as well. So when we go into their report itself, obviously start with the table of contents, get a high level overview of what are they covering, right? What are they even trying to tell you in this report? And so when you look at the table of contents for this one, you can see that once you get past the introduction, there are 3 kind of mid sections of this report that really cover the content that they're trying to talk about. So the first one is climate strategy. The second one is governance and risk management. And then the third one is metrics and targets. For those of you that might be familiar with the TCFD, or the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, this framework is very common, and this really covers all the main points of the TCFD. And the reason why I wanted to point this out, so the 4 sections, strategy, governance, risk, and metrics, is a framework that has become very popular in the investor world. So Suncor is obviously a public company, so you can tell that they're clearly putting this report together as an investor relations document. And because they can kind of multi-purpose this content for investors as well as for regulators, the detail of the data that they have in here will really show that they're anticipating that they're going to be talking to people that know what they're talking about, right? So there are a couple key sections that I want to show you in here. And this page is particularly interesting because you can see that the headline here is reducing emissions in their base business. So they're doing a lot of reporting on what they're doing, kind of, you can call it like within their 4 walls, right? What Suncor has control over. And so you can see that they have a bunch of projects on the bottom right. So there's carbon capture and storage, energy efficiency, fuel switching, things like this. These are quite like technical terms, right? So this is not necessarily intended for a consumer audience. And just the heaviness of the content is a kind of a giveaway for that. Something else that I want to point out here is this is in their risk management section. Along the left-hand column here, that is a laundry list of associations and groups that they're involved in. And some of these are based on different jurisdictions that they operate in, right? Because Suncor is aware that they have a lot of people looking at their information and they want to be obviously involved in industry initiatives. So you can see that there's some cap and trade things on here. There's some regulations listed. Like, this is a very clear indication of all the different entities that are watching what Suncor is doing. And they're disclosing this because TCFD likes that you disclose that. So that's pretty obvious that they're regulatory motivated. And then in the last section here for metrics and targets, this is where they get into some of the data of their report. It's actually, of the 50-something page document, the metrics and targets section is actually not that big. And again, it's partially because they're aligning to TCFD likely, but it's also because, Suncor, you can think what you want about them as a company, but they do have, just select data that they really need to put out there to comply with the base expectations of them. They're not necessarily trying to push the needle and put out a full life cycle assessment and all these crazy decarbonization efforts, beyond their 4 walls. But a couple of the different pages in here, you can see that they've got their targets that they're reporting. Again, this is required with TCFD. They also have some high-level scope 1 and 2 emissions. And I say this is high level because for an oil and gas company, this is high level. But you can see that they have a couple years prior data in there as well, which really helps with transparency. But you can see that they've been doing this for a long time because they have to. And this is not necessarily like pushing the needle on climate reporting, right? It's a lot, but it's also what's expected. And then they also have some intensity metrics here. So the previous bar chart was showing their total scope 1 and 2, and the intensity metrics are basically your emissions per dollar or per barrel of oil produced. And then you can see in here, they do have a summary of their scope 3 emissions. And so there is information here. It's required that you disclose your methodology for calculating your scope 3, but they do have some coverage information, what's in, what's out, and you can tell that if you really look into the details here, you can, maybe we'll share the link to this after in case people really want to dig into it, but in the second half of this page, you can see that for a lot of the forward thinking, if you really want to push the needle on your scope 3 reporting, their data availability is quite low. And they haven't really put in much effort to dig for it, it seems like, considering they've been doing this for a long time, right? So these are just some of the things that you can look for in their reporting. And then, of course, this is a full scope 3 summary. So Suncor is a really interesting example because they have very high credibility in terms of the data they are presenting, but they are not necessarily leading, and those are a couple of things that you can use to kind of suss them out a bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so in summary, obviously regulatory compliance is their main motivation. They do have framework alignment for TCFD. They also have CDP that they submit, and that's likely a requirement as well. And what's interesting is that in the report I just showed you, they actually don't say anything about their verification level, but in CDP, they do say that everything is verified by a third party. So it's kind of assumed for these larger organizations, even though it's not explicit in their reports. And then, of course, they're aligned to a bunch of regional frameworks, and they have a lot of focus on the climate impact. And it's very clearly for regulatory purposes because it's heavy content. Awesome.
Cool. Okay, let's look at another example.
Something more fun.
Something more fun. No, but we'll pass it over to Vanessa, who's going to take a look at Cargill's ESG report and just some key little pieces to pull out of it.
Little nuggets.
Yeah, so we'll be focusing on Cargill, and one differentiator between what Erin went through is that was a climate report that she went through. This is an ESG report. So just highlighting that now. And so at first, we just want to review their table of contents. So it is 100+ page document, but they are covering different things from their strategy, their climate plans, anything related to people, ethics, and compliance. So they're covering a lot of information across this document. So it is very much comprehensive. And one shout out is if you go look at the far right, there's an appendix and you'll see TCFD, which is something that was referenced in the Suncor report as well. The SASB index, which is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. So it's another framework that they're also kind of aligned to, and also Animal Welfare Index. So they're putting a lot of content already and presenting it and making it available to anyone who wants to view it. And so they do highlight what they're doing with their scope 1 and 2 emissions. So they're not explicit in terms of what those actual numbers are, but they are working, or they've actually submitted to the Science Based Targets Initiative, or the SBTI. So they do have ambitious targets that they have to reach. And those are ambitious targets, but they're also being held accountable through this initiative. And this initiative as well has over 3,400 companies that are also creating these targets and are also aligned to it. So they are part of this community that is keeping them accountable and in achieving those goals. And then they go into a little bit of scope 3 as well. Again, they're not explicitly saying how much of their scope 3 emissions they have or they're emitting, but a big focus is their supply chain as well. And so they kind of outline some different initiatives that they're going through in terms of making their supply chain greener. And they did it because they know that's such a large impact on climate. They actually have dedicated a whole section within the report related to supply chain. So they have various focus areas, different programs and partnerships that they've created in order to get to a more sustainable point. And then one thing that's really interesting, so kind of a contrast to the Suncor report where they don't necessarily highlight what level of assurance it is, but it's kind of assumed. Through the Cargill report, they have a whole page just dedicated to how that process worked and also what level of assurance they have. So there's that.
And that's also quite common in industries where they're not regulated because it's so variable of like, is this just a marketing document or can I trust the numbers?
Yeah.
Which is likely why they wanted to really put this front and center.
Yeah, for sure. And then going back to that final part where in the appendix, they have those different frameworks that they're also aligned with. They outline here the TCFD index, and it also branches out to their CDP submissions as well. So they're very transparent when it comes to the work that they're doing, which is really great to see. And they've made this report very comprehensive to show that they are making strides in the right direction. And so when we look also into just very high level of everything, their motivation was just supply chain pressure. They're aligned with different frameworks like the TCFD, SASB, and the UN SDGs. So it wasn't highlighted in that condensed version of the report, but a lot of their initiatives kind of relate back to those global goals that we mentioned earlier on. And then we are reassured with their level of assurance because of that one page dedicated to it. So it's disclosed that it's a limited level of assurance. And then some other key takeaways, they're aligned with another framework, which is the Animal Welfare Index. They have SBTI. They've already created targets with them and submitted them, and they've submitted to CDP. And they also, this report is really designed to address that customer pressure. So it is a document that's a bit more digestible, and it's really great to see the different initiatives and the different work that they're doing as well.
They have like nice to read graphs,
Yeah.
not like deep, heavy.
Yeah, it's not as
content.
dense, which is nice. It is a lengthy report, but it's really great to see the different initiatives that they're taking on. So yeah.
Yeah, where I notice it, and we'll see it even more in the next one, but instead of using numbers or absolute metrics, there's more percentages or percentage reduction to try to tell a story as opposed to report to an auditor. So that's interesting.
For sure.
Very cool. Okay, so I am going to just briefly share a little review of Allbirds' flight status, which they're calling our version of a sustainability report. If you're not familiar with the brand, Allbirds is a shoe company who started with the motivation to create a natural shoe product. And so they were making merino wool shoes, and they make all sorts of different kinds of shoes now. And sustainability has been a core part of their brand from the very beginning. So I'm not sure exactly what type of businesses are joining us here on the live stream, but I imagine that this size of business anyway is a bit more similar to the average. You know, SMEs make up the majority of businesses in North America. And so a company like this would more closely reflect the type of report that the average business might want to produce.
Yeah, especially for consumers.
For consumers, specifically, yes. This is, you know, you or me buying some shoes. So.
I love this report because it's fun.
It is fun. It's sometimes it's too fun, but we'll get there. Okay, this is truly the second page of their report, and it says because she doesn't love a chart. And again, this is just speaking to that story of how do we show our consumers what sustainability means and what the value of it is. And they've relied heavily throughout this report on benchmarking. So what they're trying to say is, compared to the average sneaker or another sneaker brand compared to us, what is the climate impact and how much better can we be than an alternative? So they're trying to have a near zero footprint in 2030, and what is their progress towards that, and how does that compare to the average sneaker, which is kind of cool.
Also, I just noticed this, but it looks like they are net zero today, but they're not. It's 2022, which I know the arrows are there, but I didn't notice that until right now.
No, for sure. It's very
sneaky.
It's actually a little funny.
Yeah, yeah. It shows the intention very clearly, but I thought that was interesting.
Totally. So yeah, another thing, and this is the benchmarking, right? So they're saying we want to cut in half by the end of 2025. We want to be close to zero by 2030. It's just really simple illustrations to tell that story.
And this one's cool too because they benchmark against themselves.
Yes.
BAU versus what they've done.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, it's true. They share in the flight status a couple of ways that they are trying to reduce that impact of per shoe. And again, just a different way of approaching this entire report is that the most of what they're trying to do here is tell you the emissions per product, or the carbon footprint for each of their pairs of shoes, or what you would buy as a consumer. And again, it's a better story for an individual because they are going to understand what the total emissions of their company means relative to anything else. Yeah, and they share a couple of ways that they're trying to reduce their footprint, which is interesting. They are really clear about saying when data is nuanced or when it's not showing the full picture and why, and so I did appreciate that. And they're also part of a voluntary network called the Climate Neutral Certification Program. And so they are climate neutral certified, which just means that after they've measured all of their emissions, whatever they cannot reduce, they're offsetting through carbon offsets. And then that's verified by this network called Climate Neutral Certified. And so unlike the previous two, they've engaged in an additional marketing forward verification process to be able to put that stamp on their website, really.
There's a lot of education in here.
There's a ton of education, and I think that if I'm the target audience, it landed, so it's smart. And again, because it is voluntary, it's obviously really important to them.
Yeah.
Which is cool. Amazing. So yeah, just wrapping all of that up, and motivation, obviously into their values and branding and talking to their customers. The framework that they built this report under, it's for fun. They didn't really speak too much about any framework. It's not very obvious. In a different document on their website, they do reference a couple of the sustainable development goals, which are a lot more consumer friendly as well. They have icons and you can understand them. They're colorful.
Yeah, love a square.
Yeah, and they are working on a project where they have their own internal tool that does life cycle analysis assessments to measure the product carbon footprint of their things. And that process has been verified by a third party to be aligned to ISO 14067, which is just another standard.
Yeah, fun fact, ISO 14067, close to 14064, but this one is for life cycle assessment specifically. So to say, what's the carbon impact of this one product versus the carbon impact of all of our operations. So it's a relevant standard that they've aligned to. It's just not ISO 14064 because they have nothing there about their corporate inventory because they don't care. That's not the point. Yeah, it's fun.
It is interesting, and it was fun to read, and I appreciate the effort from a consumer product, and we all wish that this wasn't outstanding. It would be amazing if more companies had this as almost a standard of what you should share about the impact of your product, environmental and social. But it's a fun example because they entered the market with this at the front of it. So.
Which one was your favorite across the three?
I think I'm biased. I did like the Cargill one.
I like mine.
I think I say that only because it was a very comprehensive report, and it felt like they are taking the initiative to keep themselves held accountable, like joining these different networks, submitting to these different frameworks and things like that. So I think I do appreciate that level of accountability, and I know it's also motivated through customer pressure and things like that, but it is really neat to see that they are trying to go a little bit more above and beyond and kind of have that information made available to everyone. What about you?
Plot twist, I like Allbirds because it's basically what we try to do, right? It's like, who are you talking to? And then customize the effort based on where they're trying to go, right? Like, to be aligned to ISO 14067, like, you have to do your corporate inventory first, right? Like, what we do is the foundation to everything, right? So Allbirds has put in the work. They're just being really smart about the level of detail they're providing back to people to generate the business value, which is, I think, what all these examples get to, right? Suncor is generating business value because they want to operate in jurisdictions that have regulations, right? for Cargill, they want to unlock decarbonizing supply chains. They want to supply to Walmart and Costco and all the big people. Then Allbirds is just consumers. But from a consumer's perspective, Allbirds is like by far the funnest and easiest. So I like it.
Yeah, I think we all have a slight bias now that we know more about climate reporting and what it takes to generate these. And so if I'm putting my objective human walking down the street hat on, obviously the one that I would appreciate the most is the one that understands what matters to me.
Yeah.
But I'm also a consumer. I'm not, Walmart.
A corporate procurement person.
I don't buy bulk beef for Wendy's, so depending on who your audience is, it really changes what matters. And we'll do some more reflecting later, but I think the important thing that I was thinking about is like they're all trying and they're all doing more than the average company. And this isn't a slander on any of them. It's just
they're all doing a great job on climate reporting.
It's just how they're different.
Yeah,
cool.
Exactly.
I do want to just make one comment for Allbirds specifically. I think I read something the other day related to the carbon, like doing a life cycle assessment or analysis on a specific product. And someone made the comment that how crazy would it be if every industry or every product line had that information, and similar to like those nutritional facts you see at the grocery store, being able to literally compare like life LCA to LCA and make that judgment call in store or online. So
yeah, we have customers that have that aspiration.
For sure.
That's like, I think that would be like so cool. Just more informed, more transparency, but then even like pushing it further and having like other sustainability certifications I know exist, but it's like quick consumer information is so hard to crack. That'd be cool though. Very cool.
Yeah. I'll go slightly further off track and then we'll pull it back in. But it just reminds me of this kind of push and pull between blame, where we're trying to say, okay, is it big business that's to blame for the climate crisis? Is it individuals? Like, who should carry that burden? And with Carbonhound, anyway, I think what we're trying to say is that everybody has a role to play. And so how do you give people, individual consumers, but businesses as well, the tools to be able to make that change and to do their individual part?
Knowledge is power, baby.
Yeah.
So, give them the information.
Yeah. It's good.
Amazing. Okay, that's fun. So I think next we're going to go into some more of our own examples. The Carbonhound's report. We're going to dissect our own.
So we can talk a little bit about how we generated our carbon footprint. We have this platform that our customers use, and it only made sense that we also use that platform ourselves and start measuring our carbon footprint as well. So it was a little bit of a process that we embarked on, but at a very high level, these are kind of some of the steps that we took. And so I'll go through these steps, and then I'll actually present our GHG inventory report as well. So kicking it off, we had to collaborate with the team, really understand what our organizational and operational boundaries were, and understanding what areas of our day-to-day business is material. So getting that input from the team and recognizing like, okay, these sources or these emission sources are the most material and are creating a climate impact, and we want to be able to capture that. And then next, it was a matter of figuring out who owned that data or who had access to that data. So whether that was direct data from providers or spend data as well, we just had to figure out who has that information available that we can use and we can extract from, and then actually get it calculated. And then next, we had to, source our emission factors for each of these emission sources. So we looked at things like life cycle assessments, actually, for some of the items that we've purchased under our capital goods product category as well. And so it was a matter of us just gathering that data and just implementing it or adding it to the platform. And then once that was all set and everything was configured in terms of understanding all of our different emission sources, we started to upload that data onto the platform. And then we got all that data reviewed by multiple people on the team as well, just to make sure everything looked good. And once we had that all set and we felt confident about the data as well, we we got the opportunity to also apply benchmarks. So we were able to compare our data as a company to other organizations who have made their GHG inventory or their climate reporting available to the public as well. And so benchmarks, actually, if you were on our last live stream, we touched on as one of the features on our platform. So we've been able to compare ourselves either on a per employee basis as well, just to see how we compare against those ones. And so, yeah, that's kind of the process of how we generated our carbon footprint. And now I can go through the actual report.
Yeah, let's get into it. It's super fun because, you know, you're going to go into all the different sections of this in a second, but this is the type of reporting that we can generate for folks that use Carbonhound, right? It makes it really easy. Like, how much time did you spend like putting this report together, like from a data perspective, right? Because we did it in the software.
So collecting the data to be uploaded took about a week's time. And then we were able to have those calculations made immediately because we had those emission factors available and the calculations are kind of done through the platform. And then we were able to produce this report within days' time. Just perfect timing to our live stream as well.
Amazing. Okay, let's jump into it.
Yeah, for sure. We kind of start with we're going to be measuring our GHG inventory based off of our fiscal 2023 year. And so we have a little bit of a table of contents, just a little bit about the report, inventory coverage, our climate impact. And after we dive in a bit deeper into more granular information about the GHG inventory and also our methodology overview.
Also, fun fact, this report is formatted in alignment with GHG protocol. So even though we're such a small team, we can still put out pretty reputable climate reporting, which I think is cool.
Yeah, definitely. And so on this first page here, we talk about the report a little bit. So it highlights our fiscal year 2023, and we're using 2023 as our base year because we have the most information of this year. And so we're able to compare it year over year moving forward. And yeah, like Erin mentioned, we have that little call out that these are aligned with the ISO 14064 and GHG protocol.
And we haven't been verified by a third party yet.
We have not.
But we will.
But we will. That is an undertaking we will be taking on the next few weeks, which will be really exciting. And so at a very high level summary, we get the total emissions, and we also have a little detail on what is our largest or highest impact category, which is our purchased goods and services. So a little tidbit of information that we want to just highlight to anyone who's reading our report. And then we look into our inventory coverage. So we are covering all scopes, so scope 1 to 3, and then we have just a little bit of a breakdown of that on the top right and on that table in the bottom as well. So yeah, this is for our fiscal year of 2023. And so you'll see just like this little breakdown at a very high level. And then we get a bit more granular in terms of what was included in our report and what we deemed as material emissions. So we included everything that we inputted into the platform. So anything from scope 1, so anything from natural gas to purchased electricity to anything that we purchased over this time frame, and then capital goods, some business travel, and of course office waste.
Also, just so people know, this is a very detailed breakdown. When you're reporting on the different emission sources, you don't usually have to say like what exactly you calculated, but for transparency, it's not a bad idea to. So this is, again, kind of like us being a bit extra with it. But if you wanted to, because Carbonhound, we track everything so granularly to your point, it is possible to do, if people ask.
Yeah, we got nothing to hide. And then we look at our data accuracy as well. So year over year, there's different ways that we can upgrade and improve our data quality and data accuracy. So we have estimated data that kind of falls into some of the spend-based data that we used. And then after we have direct usage data. So if we know exactly the data coming from a specific source that was deemed as higher quality. And then we'll get this information also verified when we work with our third-party verifier as well.
Shout out Bright Spot.
Yes. And then this was in relation to the benchmarks comment made earlier, but after we calculated our carbon footprint, we selected Shopify as another Canadian tech company to compare ourselves with. So on the top right, you'll see the total emissions by full-time employee. So Carbonhound in comparison is much lower, about almost half of an average Shopify employee. And then when we look at the bottom right, when we look based off of total emissions, we do significantly better in comparison to Shopify.
Shocker.
Might be different reasons for that for sure, but we do just want to have that benchmark as an option, just to make ourselves, just to show the type of work that we're doing, and also to be able to compare it to other competitors or other organizations in similar industries as us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I was just going to say, I think a question that we come across a lot is businesses who think their footprint is really small, and so there's no point in measuring it, right? They're like, oh, well, we all work remote, or we just provide a service, or we don't have things that emit, or we just rent our office space. And I think what's really cool about what you can do in a report like this is that you can prove it, and so it is worth measuring, right? It's like, well, if you're already doing all of that to be efficient and to be really thoughtful about your emissions and your impact, like prove it, show people, and actually get value out of it if you're already doing it. So anyway, it's something that people say all the time, and it's cool to use benchmarks to actually show the value of that work that they're doing.
Yeah, I agree. And like this one is total emissions by full-time employee. But you can also do total emissions by dollar spent. And that's where, if you're selling to big corporate customers that are perhaps trying to become net zero or reduce their impact, to your point, if you're operationally efficient, then like get some business value out of that and tell Microsoft why you're a better supplier than someone with 50 office buildings. Right? You can compete on that carbon difference, especially for people that are net zero. And we're not necessarily doing that with this information because obviously it's by FTE and total emissions, but whatever metric is most meaningful for you, you have the data, so we can scale it by whatever matters most. It could be by square footage, right? It could be by, number of animals raised if you're Cargill or whoever, right? Like there are so many ways you can make this really valuable based on your business.
Yeah. Such a fun feature too, just to be able to compare against others.
It's so helpful.
And then we kind of ended off with a little bit of an appendix where we have a breakdown of our GHG emissions again, based off of category. And as you can see, we have some data from our fiscal year of 2022, but we decided to move forward with our baseline year as 2023, just because we have a more holistic view based off of our current operations. So we made that decision to move forward with. Yeah. And then at the end, we highlight just reporting approach and methodology, including, once again, our time frame, data measurement, uncertainty, any assumptions that are being made, and just what reporting standards we're also abiding to. So it is a very informative report. It tells you exactly our breakdown of scope 1 to 3 emissions. And because we have this foundation of a report as well, and we have information on our carbon footprint, it gives us the opportunity to, make meaningful reduction initiatives towards, decreasing our carbon footprint over time as well. So there's a lot of opportunity to kind of use this information and actually find ways to become more sustainable or choose more sustainable options as well.
Yeah, and one last thing I want to note is that all of this kind of reporting approach and methodology and about this report and all this kind of like technical additional information is all done for you because we store all of this in your Carbonhound account, right? We know your baseline year, we know what we've used and what we haven't used based on when we set things up. So you don't have to worry about all of these like, oh, asterisks here, asterisks there. Like we've tracked all of it, which makes report drafting and exporting a report like this pretty standard for us, but saves you a lot of time because you wouldn't have to go and write all this stuff up by yourself.
Cool.
Great job.
Amazing. So yeah, I think want to leave a bit of space to talk about some of the key takeaways from all of the reports that we've just seen, including ours, and some things that we learned in trying to develop our own report. Yeah, my biggest thing right now I'm thinking about is your audience really dictates what you include in that report. And it doesn't mean that it should be any less credible, but the type of information you include can really vary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And like even in the report that we just showed you for ourselves, it's high level enough that it's not overwhelming if you wanted to use it for consumers, but then it's detailed enough that if you did have people who are maybe digging into it a bit more, you're covering the bases, which I think is pretty cool about how we designed this one in our app specifically. But for reporting generally, yeah, like it's a huge world of people following standards and not following standards. So hopefully this gives people a little bit of a framework to think about it.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
And also just to call out as well, if you are embarking in or taking part in different reduction initiatives as well, or you've purchased offsets and things like that, that can also be included in this type of report, just for the sake of transparency as well. And if you want to highlight, this is our carbon footprint, this is what we're doing to kind of move forward and become more sustainable. So yeah, there's ways to tailor this report as well, and to really highlight the work that's being done to get us to a point that you're addressing the climate impact that your company makes. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so just I'm thinking, if I am starting this journey as a small or medium-sized company, I mean, Suncor has their own, a bajillion people working on this,
consultants,
right? Like
everyone.
Yeah, they have third party, they have external, they have internal. There's lots of people working on a report like that. For Allbirds, because it is so deeply ingrained in their business, they probably have somebody who's leading this work full-time anyway. For us, this was a project that we undertook kind of as a team. I mean, Vanessa really led it, but it was a group effort. So yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about what people would be involved in building any report typically. Yeah, I guess it just really depends on
once you have the data.
resources.
Do you have the data? That's always the question. The data is the hardest part, right?
Yeah.
Like drafting it is just annoying. Like any sustainability leader that I've met over the years, it doesn't matter the industry, doesn't matter their motivations. When it's reporting season, everyone's like, this is gonna suck. And it's not necessarily the story drafting or any of that. Like yes, that's time consuming, but they can work with people on that, right? Get facilities to help, and how are we decarbonizing or putting solar on our buildings, right? Or HR, how are we incentivizing employees to, commute to work or bike to work or whatever through green methods. But the data is always the hardest part. That's what people ultimately look at, right? When you're talking about people, whether it's like a customer or a consumer trying to get informed. So I feel like the data, whoever's spearheading that, it's hard to do manually, right? So I feel for people around reporting season. So software is becoming more necessary, but there's a lot of stakeholders, no doubt.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing I really appreciate too, is just there's so many people that have to get involved or who have that type of information that you need, but it's also kind of an opportunity to build that climate literacy within a team as well, and kind of get them engaged. Like, okay, this is why your function is so important to our business. It's not only, helping us with our day-to-day, but it also has a climate impact, and we want to find ways to reduce that climate impact. So it's definitely an opportunity to kind of build that climate literacy over time within a company.
Yeah, because then you delegate the effort if you're the person leading the report, and you are ultimately achieving the goal of the leadership, which is like everybody needs to be involved to decarbonize. If you're in procurement, right? Like, do you know what sustainable procurement is? Like, maybe not, but this could be a way to teach. I like it. That's a good take.
Yeah, I think I like that a lot too, and I think it leads into this question of how you actually communicate the value of this data. But it's fun because people are involved from lots of different parts of the business, right? You need to involve facilities, accounting, whatever. But to be able to generate a report and show them what that data led to, or what those inputs were ultimately for, is very cool. If we had just measured our footprint and wrote a little number on the bottom of our website, like that's nice. But to be able to actually have it in a report to show people what that like work went into,
Mhm.
I think is very cool and very rewarding. And that's it's just the value piece that gets lost a lot in sustainability work.
Yeah, it's like once you have the data, then you can credibly make it your entire personality, right?
Prove
Because
it.
otherwise people are like, oh my God, we love sustainability. And it's like a bit greenwashing. But once you have the data, you're like, oh, we know where our emissions are coming from. So using that insight, we will target whatever areas, which is what Cargill did, right? Like that's why they're so focused on like holistic agriculture and things like that. So yeah, once the marketing team has access to data, you can blow it up.
Yeah.
And be like confident in it.
Yeah,
it's true.
It's a big piece.
Amazing. Yeah, so we're reaching the end of our little live stream here. We're, we could talk for a lot longer if we wanted to about this. Feel free to drop your questions in the comments on the live stream and we'll respond to them right in LinkedIn. Also, at any time, feel free to DM any of us individually or just shoot us a note on Carbonhound as well. But that's it. That's all from the three of us.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Thanks for joining.
Have a great day.
Bye.